She was 18 years old when they hanged her, tortured for hours in sub-zero cold, stripped naked and beaten until her body was unrecognizable. Yet she never spoke. Not a single name, not one location, not even under the threat of death. Her final words, delivered barefoot in the snow with a noose around her neck, would ignite a nation and terrify an empire. This is the story of Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, the girl who became a symbol of resistance so powerful, even her executioners could not silence her. Comment below. Have you ever heard of Zoya's story before today? Moscow, 1923. The Soviet Union is still young, raw, trying to forge a new world from the ashes of revolution. In a small town called Osinogai, a girl is born into this turbulent era. Her name is Zoya. She is quiet, serious, the kind of child who reads too much and speaks too little. Her brother Shura remembers her as shy but stubborn, someone who would finish every book she started, no matter how difficult. Their mother, a teacher, raises them with discipline and ideals. Loyalty, duty, sacrifice for the collective. These are not abstract words in the Kosmodemyanskaya household. They are survival instructions. Zoya grows up in a world where fear is always present. Stalin's purges sweep through the country. Friends disappear. Neighbors are arrested. Her own father dies under mysterious circumstances, likely a victim of the state he believed in. Yet somehow this does not crush Zoya's faith. Instead, it sharpens it. She joins the Komsomol, the Communist Youth League, not out of blind obedience, but out of a fierce belief that the revolution, flawed as it is, must be defended. She is 17 when the radio crackles with the news that will change everything. June 22nd, 1941. Nazi Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. The reports are chaotic. Entire armies are collapsing. Cities are burning. Refugees flood the roads, desperate and starving. Zoya listens in her small apartment in Moscow, and something inside her hardens. She does not cry. She does not panic. She simply makes a decision. She will fight. Not someday. Not when she is older. Now, her mother begs her not to go. But Zoya is not asking for permission. She is already gone. Operation Barbarossa was not just an invasion, it was annihilation by design. 3 million German soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft, smashed through Soviet defenses in a matter of days. Entire divisions were surrounded, cut off, destroyed. The Luftwaffe bombed cities without mercy. In the first weeks, the Red Army lost over 2 million men. The world watched in shock as the seemingly unstoppable Soviet state crumbled under the weight of the Wehrmacht's steel and fire. For the people living in the path of the German advance, it was the end of the world. Villages were razed, women and children were shot in ditches. The Nazis did not see the Slavs as human. They saw them as obstacles to be cleared. The orders were explicit. Take everything, burn everything, leave nothing behind. The German army group center was driving toward Moscow, and nothing seemed capable of stopping it. Soviet citizens were paralyzed by a mixture of terror and disbelief. Many had believed the propaganda that the Red Army was invincible. Now, they were watching it disintegrate. Some fled east. Others waited in silence, hoping the Germans would be lenient. They were wrong. The stories that came back from the occupied zones were horrifying. Mass executions, starvation, entire populations enslaved or murdered. The Nazi plan was clear. This was not conquest. It was extermination. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Ordinary people, untrained and terrified, began to resist, not because they loved Stalin, but because they loved their homes. Farmers sabotaged German supply lines. Factory workers smuggled weapons. Students like Zoya volunteered for missions they knew they might not survive. The Soviet state had failed to protect them, but they would protect each other. In Moscow, the government issued desperate calls for volunteers. The Red Army was bleeding out. The NKVD, the secret police, began organizing partisan units, small, covert teams designed to operate behind enemy lines. Their missions were simple but deadly. Burn German supplies, destroy communication lines, assassinate collaborators. These were not soldiers. They were teenagers, teachers, factory workers. They had no formal training. Many had never held a gun, but they had something the Germans did not expect: the willingness to die before surrendering. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya stepped forward. She was 18 years old, small, quiet, and utterly unafraid. When the recruiters asked if she understood the risks, she nodded. When they asked if she was ready to die for the motherland, she said yes without hesitation. They believed her. And so, in the frozen autumn of 1941, Zoya became a partisan. The training was brutal and short. There was no time for long preparation. Moscow itself was under siege. Zoya and her unit, all young Komsomol volunteers, were taught how to move silently through forests, how to set fires, how to use knives and explosives. They were taught how to lie under interrogation, how to withstand pain, how to kill if necessary. Most importantly, they were taught never to reveal the names of their comrades. Betrayal was the only unforgivable sin. Zoya absorbed it all with quiet intensity. Her instructors noted that she was not the strongest or the fastest, but she was the most disciplined. She did not complain. She did not question. She simply prepared. Her fellow partisans remember her as serious, almost somber, but never cold. She had a deep sense of purpose. She believed, with the kind of conviction that only the very young possess, that she could make a difference. The ideology of the Komsomol was woven into every aspect of their mission. They were told they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity. The Nazis represented barbarism, slavery, darkness. The Soviets, despite their flaws, represented progress, equality, hope. It was a simplistic narrative, but in the face of extermination, it was enough. Zoya believed it. Not blindly, but desperately. She needed something to believe in, and this was all she had. Her unit was assigned to Operational Group 9903, a sabotage squad tasked with disrupting German operations near Moscow. Their targets were supply depots, communication posts, stables full of horses the Germans relied on for transport in the brutal Russian winter. The missions were suicide runs. Most partisans never returned. Zoya knew this. Everyone knew this. But someone had to go. Before her first deployment, she wrote a letter to her mother. It was short, formal, almost detached. She did not mention fear. She did not ask for comfort. She only wrote, "Do not worry. I am doing what must be done." Her mother would never see her alive again. In late October 1941, Zoya's unit was deployed into the forests west of Moscow. The Germans were advancing, and the Soviet defense was on the brink of collapse. The partisans moved at night, invisible, silent, ghosts in the snow. Their orders were clear. Burn everything the enemy could use. Do not get caught. If you are caught, say nothing. Zoya carried a backpack filled with flammable materials, matches, and a knife. She wore a thin coat and felt boots that barely kept out the cold. She looked like a student, not a soldier. That was the point. If stopped, she was to pretend to be a lost villager. But deep down, she knew that if the Germans found her with sabotage tools, there would be no pretending. As the forest closed in around her and the temperature dropped below freezing, Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya walked into history. The winter of 1941 was one of the coldest in Russian history. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius. The snow was deep enough to bury a man. The forests near Moscow became a frozen labyrinth, where movement was slow, visibility was poor, and frostbite could kill faster than bullets. For the German soldiers, used to the milder winters of Western Europe, it was a nightmare. But for the Soviet partisans, it was an advantage. They knew this land. They knew how to survive it, and they knew how to use it as a weapon. Zoya's unit moved through the woods like shadows. They avoided roads, avoided villages, avoided any place the Germans might be watching. Their missions were simple but dangerous. Approach German-held positions under cover of darkness, set fires, and disappear before the alarm could be raised. Each mission was a gamble. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and they would be captured. And capture meant torture. Capture meant death. But the partisans pressed on. They burned stables in the village of Petrishchevo, destroying horses the Germans desperately needed for supply transport. They cut telephone wires, isolating German units from their command. They planted explosives on roads, turning every journey into a potential death sentence. Each act of sabotage was small, almost insignificant on its own. But together they were crippling. The Germans began to fear the forests. They began to fear the silence, because they never knew when the next fire would start or where the next partisan would strike. Zoya participated in several of these missions with cold efficiency. She did not hesitate. She did not flinch. She simply did what she was trained to do. Her comrades later recalled that she was always the first to volunteer, always the last to retreat. She moved through the snow with a kind of grim determination that unnerved even her own unit. It was as if she had already accepted her death and was simply waiting for it to find her. On the night of November 27, 1941, Zoya's unit was tasked with burning German supplies in the village of Petrishchevo. It was a risky target, German soldiers were billeted there, and the villagers, desperate and afraid, could not be trusted. But the mission was critical. The Red Army was barely holding the line. Every German stable, every supply depot destroyed, bought Moscow a few more hours. The partisans split up to cover more ground. Zoya was paired with another fighter, but they became separated in the darkness. She was alone now, moving through the frozen village with a bag of incendiaries and a pounding heart. She reached a stable. She set the fire. The flames roared to life, lighting up the night sky. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel triumph. The mission was a success, but then she heard voices, German voices, and they were getting closer. Panic is a luxury partisans cannot afford. Zoya ran, but the snow was deep and her body was exhausted. She stumbled, regained her footing, kept moving. Behind her, the Germans were shouting. Dogs were barking. The village was waking up. And then, the worst possible thing happened. A local villager, terrified of German reprisals, pointed her out. She was surrounded. There was no escape, no last-minute miracle, no heroic final stand. Just a young girl, alone in the snow, staring at the barrels of German rifles. They grabbed her, searched her, found the incendiary materials, the propaganda leaflets, the Komsomol identification card. The evidence was damning. She was a saboteur, a terrorist, a Soviet partisan, and the penalty for that was death. But death would not come quickly. They took her to the German command post in Petryshevo. The building was cold, dim, filled with the stench of sweat and smoke. The German officers looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. She was so young, so small. How could someone like her be a threat? But the evidence spoke for itself. She had burned their stables. She had destroyed their supplies. She was the enemy. They asked her name. She refused to answer. They asked for her unit's location. She said nothing. They asked who sent her. Silence. The Germans were patient at first. They tried intimidation, then bribery, then threats. Nothing worked. Zoya sat in that cold room, bruised and terrified, but she did not speak. Then the beatings began. They struck her with rifle butts, with belts, with fists. They pulled her hair. They tore her clothes. They wanted her to scream, to beg, to break. But Zoya did not break. She absorbed the pain with a kind of terrible stillness, as if her body and mind had split apart, and only the mind remained, locked away somewhere the Germans could not reach. One officer, frustrated and enraged, dragged her outside into the freezing night. She was barefoot now, barely clothed, her skin exposed to temperatures that could kill in minutes. They marched her through the village, forcing her to stand in the snow while they interrogated her again. Her feet turned black with frostbite. Her lips cracked and bled. Her body shook uncontrollably. But still, she said nothing. The villagers watched from their windows, terrified and ashamed. Some wept. Others looked away. They knew what was happening. They knew this girl was being tortured, and they knew that tomorrow she would be dead. The Germans brought her back inside, but only to continue the interrogation. They burned her with cigarettes. They beat her until her face was unrecognizable. They stripped her completely, hoping humiliation would succeed where pain had failed. But Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, 18 years old, freezing and broken, refused to give them a single name, not one location, not one piece of intelligence. She had become something the Germans did not understand. Not a soldier, not a fanatic, something deeper, a symbol of defiance so absolute it could not be beaten out of her. And so, they decided to make an example of her. November 29th, 1941, the village of Petryshevo. A makeshift gallows has been erected in the town square. The Germans have ordered all the villagers to attend. This is not just an execution, it is a warning. Resist, and this will be your fate. Zoya is brought out into the cold. She is barely recognizable. Her face is swollen, her body covered in bruises and burns. A wooden sign hangs around her neck. Arsonist. The Germans want the villagers to see her as a criminal, a terrorist, a threat to their safety. But the villagers see something else. They see a girl, a child, someone's daughter, and they see the Germans for what they are. Zoya is led to the gallows. The noose is placed around her neck. The German soldiers stand ready, rifles raised, waiting for the order. The villagers are silent, frozen not just by the cold, but by the weight of what they are witnessing. And then, Zoya speaks. Her voice is hoarse, cracked, but it carries. She does not beg. She does not plead. Instead, she looks at the villagers and says, "Comrades, why are you so gloomy? Be brave, fight, beat the Germans, burn, poison them. I am not afraid to die. I am happy to die for my people. Then she turns to the German soldiers, and she says, "You will hang me now, but I am not alone. There are 200 million of us. You cannot hang us all." The Germans are stunned. The villagers are stunned. This was supposed to be a moment of submission, of terror, of capitulation. Instead, it has become an act of defiance so powerful, it will echo for decades. The order is given. The platform drops. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya is hanged, but even in death the Germans cannot silence her. Her body is left hanging in the square for days, a warning to others. But the villagers do not see a warning. They see a martyr. And when Soviet forces retake the village weeks later, they find her body frozen and mutilated, still bearing the marks of torture, and then the world learns her name. Soviet journalists arrived in Petrishchevo in early 1942. The Germans had retreated, and the frozen village was littered with the remnants of war. Among the debris, they found Zoya's body. Photographs were taken. Reports were written. The story of the girl who refused to break, who defied the Nazis until her last breath, spread like wildfire. Stalin himself ordered her story to be amplified. She was posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the country. Her image appeared on posters, in newspapers, in propaganda films. School children were taught her name. Soldiers carried her photograph into battle. Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya became more than a person. She became a symbol of Soviet resistance, of the refusal to surrender, of the price of freedom. But beyond the propaganda, her story resonated on a deeper level. She was not a general or a commissar. She was an ordinary girl who chose to fight. And in that choice, millions of others saw themselves. They saw that resistance was possible. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. Zoya's legacy endures. Schools, streets and memorials bear her name. Her story has been told in books, films and songs. But the most important legacy is not the monuments. It is the memory of what she represented. She was proof that even in the darkest moments, when the world is burning and hope seems lost, one person can still make a difference. One act of defiance can still matter. She was 18 years old. She had barely begun her life, but in the frozen forests of Russia, in the face of unimaginable cruelty, she chose to stand. And in that choice, she became immortal. Comment below. What act of courage, big or small, inspires you most?